Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do my best to keep this all nice and cohesive and codified because we've got a bit of history to cover. After all, it's been over a decade since the last game came out. That is to say, Devil May Cry 4. Now, that's not to say the Devil May Cry series was absent in that intervening period. There were special editions, re-releases, and of course the rather infamous DMC, so referred to because that's what it's called, don't ask me. So that's a lot of history to cover. So we got to go ahead and jot down a few things. I've got some notes here. Try and keep my thoughts coherent. One of the things, see around Robin Kira. One of the things that if you were paying attention during my previous Capcom run, which is when I was going through the Mega Man series, was that Capcom has gone through an interesting and rather tumultuous period twice. Once was right about when DMC2 and Mega Man X7 came out, and the other time was after Devil May Cry 4 came out. So, numbers vary because different people disagree and sources and blah blah blah, but everyone agrees on the salient point. Video game sales were predominantly dominated by the Japanese market for quite a long time until about in the early to mid 90s, at which point there was a slow but gradual shift from that market being completely controlled by Japan into branching out into more of a worldwide gaming market. If you've ever heard of me talk about Doom or Final Fantasy VII, you've already heard me talk about this phenomenon. It's when video gaming became mainstream. Now, that meant that a fairly large number of sales started happening outside of Japan. This is significant for two big reasons for today's story. First of all, is something that I've actually already talked to you about during the Mega Man runs. If you remember, several of the Mega Man games that came out were considered to be financial failures because they sold poorly, in Japan, ignoring the fact that those games actually sold better outside of Japan. But for the purposes of considering the success and viability of the franchise, the Capcom executives were only considering the Japanese sales figures. Remember that? Now, that led to an immediate backlash as a result of people noticing that sometime later, especially by one particular executive, Inafune, sometimes unfairly referred to as the Mega Man guy because he was the executive who was throwing political weight behind Mega Man as a franchise, and not because he actually did anything to really make Mega Man Mega Man. As a direct consequence of this, Inafune decided to go ahead and show these numbers and say, I was right all along, you should listen to me. This was a terrifyingly bad idea, because Inafune does not know what he's talking about, I think is the nicest way to put that. He's not a sleazy scumbag like Rick Berman, but from a professional perspective, he reminds me a lot of Rick Berman, someone who just happened to be the guy in a suit who happened to back a successful player, and as a consequence gets some credit for making sure that it had the political sway necessary to make sure the studio kept supporting it. Yeah, he's a businessman. He is. He's just not that great at it. He's better in the suit. I'm saying this wrong. He's better in the office than outside the office, if that makes any sense. As a consequence of this, Inafune, and I'm targeting him specifically because he is directly responsible for a lot of things we're going to be talking about today. He was so influential in Capcom that he single-handedly started an entire movement that lasted for several years amongst Capcom, which led to the release of a couple of games, which I wrote down here. Somewhere. Surely I wrote these down somewhere. Of course I didn't. Bionic Commando is the one I remember right off the top of my head. But there were several games that they released, which were all done with the same mentality in mind. Okay. We can't make games for the Japanese market anymore, so we have to make games targeted at the Western audience. All of these games kind of suck. Now, I'm not willing to say they all suck, like, severely or extremely or whatever, and I'm not willing to put down that kind of a stamp right now, but I have actually played the Bionic Commando one, which is why it's the one I remember so immediately. And Bionic Commando was not great. I'm referring to the reboot, by the way, not the 2D one. If you're not familiar with it. Oh, I do have the list right here. Bionic Commando, Dark Void, and Spyborgs. That's the trio. However, there's something else going on leading up to this. So that's one spoke of what's happening, okay? Inafune, target the West. Remember this. let's go ahead and move back over here. So in this other spoke, rewinding time a few years. I also have some actual figures. I forgot I wrote these down. Check this out. Street Fighter 4 sold about 200,000 units in Japan, which is very good. It sold 2.3 million overseas, which is astounding. Anyways, so like I said, there were shifts. Stuff was going on. Cool. Then we have to talk about Devil May Cry 4. Now, here's the funny thing. This is so funny to look back at. You remember how I mentioned how Devil May Cry 4 had all kinds of production issues and was the sacrificial lamb and didn't have the budget it needed and all that fun stuff? Well, fun fact, the Capcom executives wanted Devil May Cry 4 to be the game that would really be the blockbuster hit. In fact, they wanted it to be a direct competitor to another game, God of War 2. Now, I'm going to throw some figures at you really quick. Now, here's the thing. God of War 2... Hi, Judo Joker, give me a second. God of War 2 sold insanely well. It's one of those true, like, statistical outlier kind of games, right? Like the GTA series. And that's what they wanted. They wanted double-digit million sales figures. And the reason I'm saying that so vaguely is because I'm not sure of the exact sale figures at the time. Like, I can tell you how much God of War 2 has sold now, but back then, I'm not actually sure. But either way, even back in the day, God of War and God of War 2 were bonkers well selling. That's what they wanted Devil May Cry to be. Oh yeah, by the way, what Hazardous just said in chat is absolutely true. You cannot predict those kind of statistical outlier sales figures. They're statistical outliers. That's why it's called that. Anyways, so that's what they were wanting from Devil May Cry 4. Now, here's the really fun thing. Devil May Cry 4 sold really well. Like, about 3 million units worldwide. Now, if you've been paying any attention to any of the times I have talked about sales figures, you know that that is not just good, that is amazing. Even a AAA company should be very happy with those kind of sales figures. But you know what I'm about to say. They thought that that undersold. And they needed to course correct, because clearly this is a direct reaction to the fact that we're making this game too Japanese. We need to pivot Devil May Cry and make it appeal to the West. For those of you familiar with DMC, you now know where this is going. Now, this is doubly funny for something. I'm just going to drop something here right now for you to think about this later. So they walked into DMC specifically wanting to expand the player base, okay? Remember that for later. So they decided to make DMC. Cool. So one of the things that they did was they looked down the list of things that were common complaints. Naturally, they listened to the last person they should possibly listen to, Inafune. And Inafune was getting most of his information from large-scale game reviewers, including people like GamePro and IGN. One of the things they complained about was that the combat was too complicated and the dialogue was too cheesy. Ladies and gentlemen, tell me what a Devil May Cry game is. So, naturally, they're like, okay, we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it right. We're gonna make it better, and we're gonna change it around, and we're gonna expand the player base. It's gonna be great. So they naturally went to the perfect developer for this, Ninja Theory. Now, I don't want to spit on Ninja Theory. They're actually not particularly bad developers. In fact, as I'm going to elucidate upon you, I didn't even know this until I was doing research for this very game. DMC isn't even Ninja Theory's fault. But at the time, so nowadays you might have actually heard of Ninja Theory, but at the time, nobody had heard of Ninja Theory because they were still very new. They had just gotten their feet wet in the market. They had made 3 games. Kung Fu Chaos, which you've never heard of, Heavenly Sword, which you might have heard of, and Enslaved Odyssey of the West, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's probably their best overall game up until that point in time. So they were still new, still unpracticed, and still not sure what they were doing. And you're probably thinking, I'm sorry, hold up, Lore. You're telling me conflicting information. You're telling me that Capcom wanted to pour resources into DMC to expand the user base, and yet they're restricting those resources by going with an unproven developer to do it as a third-party thing. Uh-huh. Moving on. So, here's the thing. Regardless of the quality of the games I just mentioned, which, the thing is, Ironically, Ninja Theory focused on two things predominantly as their spokes of design at the time. Very heavy story focus. In fact, they were lauded at the time for having revolutionary motion capture tech on the facial rigging specifically, and very simplistic, easy combat. Now, you already kind of probably noticed the problem there. But anyways, so they went with Ninja Theory. Ninja Theory started doing the development. Things started moving forwards. And by this point, they were already well into production of the aforementioned games, Bionic Commando, Dark Void, and Spyborgs. So rather than reverse course, they decided to release the initial DMC trailer. Thought about showing it for you. I'm not going to. I don't want that filth on my channel. However, all I'm going to say is that it was a really bad trailer. And trust me, speaking as someone who tends to dislike trailers in general, no, really, this trailer sucked. It was a heavy focus on tone and vibe being very grungy, specifically like dirty, like filthy, and no real cheesiness. Very, very little, if any, gameplay being shown. And of course, Dante was being shown as this punk, emaciated child who looked like he was on drugs. Now, fun little fact. Less than a month after that trailer dropped, Inafune left Capcom. That doesn't really have anything to do with our story. I just had to share that because I was thinking about the timeline. And if you remember, Inafune leaving Capcom ended up being a good thing for the Mega Man series, too. Anyways, you're probably thinking all of this nonsense and all of the crap that's going on is bad vibes and bad marketing, and you're absolutely right. What you're probably also thinking is that this is all Ninja Theory's fault. So, thanks to historical lens, we can now see that almost everything regarding DMC being, what it is not actually Ninja Theory's fault at all. Every single thing that they were doing was something that was recited to them. In fact, several people have actually gone on record as saying that it was very problematic doing development because what would happen is, I want you to just picture this. Imagine you're sitting here and you're doing your job, and every day you get like a new email or a new phone call or a new, meeting or whatever saying, all right, so now for the next boss, I want you to implement this, this, and this, and then funnel it back. And it was adding such an unnecessary level of paperwork and aggravation to the chain because everything had to be come down from Capcom and then routed back up to Capcom for approval and then back down to Ninja Theory. And they might as well have just done it themselves at Capcom. But no, they're keeping Ninja Theory on board for this. So everything they were doing was something that was being recited to them. So in every way that actually matters, DMC was made by Capcom. Which makes sense because Bionic Commando, Dark Void, and Spyborgs. So lots of negative vibes, very bad press, and very bad publicity. No worries. There have been plenty of examples where there's been bad press leading up to the release of a game, and then the game was awesome, and everything's cool. However, before I go any further, I've decided not to do a deep dive on this guy. I just want to say that Tameen Antoniadis, there we go. I think I'm saying that right. I don't want to bash the guy. I really don't. But he is a perfect example of something I've talked about before, where certain people, talented or otherwise, should never be on camera. That's not really a dig. Not everyone has camera presence. Not everyone has the charisma or the mental self-check guards or the presence necessary to be the face for a company or an interview or a game or whatever, right? He is one of those people. He should not be on camera. And that's all I'm going to say right now. I can mention a couple other things. There's the frame rate issue. This is actually a funny one, because this is how it was reverse engineered, how the development of this game was kind of streamlined to make it cheaper. You should see, so when DMC came out on consoles, it was locked to 30 FPS, which, in a game as high octane as these kind of games tend to be, honestly kind of sucks. But, whatever, right? Thing is, the reason it was limited to 30 FPS was specifically because of the fact that everything about this, it was an Unreal game, Unreal 3, I believe. But they just took all of the work and engine and design, engine's the wrong word, whatever's the step below engine. that they had made for Enslaved Odyssey to the West and plopped it down and made DMC DMC out of that framework. And yeah, it doesn't help that this was when developers were really pushing 30 FPS. I remember a quote, don't ask me to say who said it because I don't remember, from one developer who actually said, I would rather take high fidelity graphics over 60 frame rate every day of the week, which is funny because I'm the exact opposite of that. And I know I'm not alone. Now, just to be very clear about this, just to talk about the frame rate thing briefly, if it doesn't bother you, that's fine. And in fact, I have no issues with that. That's cool. Everyone has their preferences. But for certain types of games, having that level of frame rate is actually important because of the sheer level of intensity and speed at with which the gameplay is. If you were to actually play Devil May Cry 5, the game we're playing today, at 30 FPS, there's actually moves and abilities and movesets that you couldn't do properly. People have actually done slowed down comparisons of what some of these games look like at 30 FPS, and it literally, because of the rate and style of the gameplay, people will just kind of lurch forward. And yes, I know that the lawnmower is right out there. You're just going to have to bear with that, because I'm not pausing for that. Now, and Hazardous is quite correct. You can get used to lower quality graphics. You cannot get used to 30 FPS. Now, Yura is correct. They decided to go ahead and release the PC version with a couple of additional fixes and changes, which allowed it to actually run at a smooth 60 FPS. And lo and behold, it was actually fine. Now, that's cool. Everything's cool about that. But it really hurt the already significant negative press going around at the time, specifically because of everything else. Like, several people who, of course, naturally do not have PCs were like, well, why don't we get 60 FPS? And the answer was basically, sucks to be you. And I'm not really kidding about that because the aforementioned comment about how to meme should not be on camera. Now, all of this being said, DMC sold pretty well, all things considered. However, we got to add a couple asterisks to that. So first of all, the whole point of DMC was to expand the user base. Naturally, it sold worse than DMC4 did. Remember, they were already disappointed with DMC4 sales because they're morons. So, that sucked. But having said all that, as of this year, DMC has sold 4.6 million units. That's great. Like, that's really, really good. Props to them. It also, in many ways, helped Ninja Theory to get on the development backing and capital that they needed to eventually find their own niche, which they did with Hellblade Senua. So, cool. However, there's a second asterisk here. And that second asterisk is it sold terribly at launch. It was destroyed at launch. Completely dominated by every other game coming out at the time. And you're probably thinking, well, who cares if it eventually sold so well? So, gaming companies, I know a lot of companies do that, but let's focus on gaming companies for a second. Gaming companies have this really unfortunate problem of putting way too much emphasis on at-launch sales rather than sales. It's one of the biggest reasons why most companies want you to pre-order, because that's a guaranteed sale that they can then mark down. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and they all suck. I could give you a huge speech. I could really dive into this one because I've actually done my research on this particular topic about misleading reports or about how people like to use at-launch figures as a way to convince people inside of their company and outside of their company and the investors board that everything's going cool. And all of that's nonsense and stupid. We're just going to get that out there. Nonsense and stupid. It's all a load of hooey. But it is what executives, especially gaming executives, tend to pay attention to. So DMC bombed at launch. And I keep adding that because, remember, it sold really well eventually. So as a result, DMC as a franchise was put on ice for a little bit. And then something weird happened. So if you're paying attention, that's our second dip in Capcom's overall history of game development. We might be entering a third dip right now. But not too long after this, yeah, the DMC Special Edition, which didn't actually take all that long to come out, came out. And that sold substantially better, all things considered, and helped contribute to the aforementioned overall success, which I've already mentioned. And some people did notice that the sales figures kept happening, like the game kept selling. So, Itsuno came forward and said, hey, actually, let me rewind a second, one more step back. Itsuno walked around the office, literally, by the way, and talked to all of the individual staff who worked on DMC 2 and 3 and 4 and said, hey, you want to fix this? You want to make a real Devil May Cry game? And the answer was a resounding yes. This is almost amusing to me, because in a similar story from DMC 2 to 3, DMC to 5 is almost the same pattern. None of them were particularly happy with what happened with DMC, and so they said, no, we actually want to make the next game. As a reminder, they didn't want to make 4. They're making 4 because they were forced to. But after DMC, they wanted to make 5. So they started shopping around, and they're like, okay, we need to make this happen. We need to progress and push forward and yada, yada, yada. So they sat down and they did a couple of things, including the DMC4 Special Edition, which was in many ways a test bed for several things they wanted to do tech-wise and design-wise with DMC5. I've said DMC so much in the last 20 minutes, it's losing all meaning. So, DMC5 happened, but the thing you have to understand about 5 is it was such a massive course correction. It was pretty much guaranteed to be a massive sales thing, but there's 2 other factors that need to be paid attention to here. So first of all, the marketing around 5 was actually really good. What they did was they sat down and said, okay, what actually makes DMC popular? Do you remember their first trailer for DMC5? Because I do. It wasn't even that long ago at this point. It was like, whoosh. It's just the right music, the right focus on the cheese and the ridiculousness, focusing on the continuity of the primary series, the primary timeline, if you will. And of course, there was actual showcasing of gameplay. And they really pushed, this is the next Devil May Cry game. So that's one thing that they had really going in their favor, the marketing side of things, and the fact that they were focusing entirely on, this is a game for the fans, which, like it or not, it was. But the other thing going in favor of it was the fact that it had been 10 years since Devil May Cry 4 came out. Which, I know, again, there was stuff in the middle there, but that's a gargantuan gap of time to go without a mainline release. Now, that's significant for 2 reasons in its own way. One, obvious, people will be more likely to get back into a franchise if it's been dead for a while. And 2, and this is actually something that not a lot of people have been thinking about, but is a slowly growing thing in the gaming industry in general. This game came out in 2019. DMC1 came back in the early aughts. There are people who were not alive when the Devil May Cry series came out that are now old enough to appreciate it. We've literally moved forward a full generation. And now there are people who are a new audience. There are literally more players that exist, more bodies of a completely new generation who could look at this and say, huh, fun fact, Devil May Cry 5 was, by a large number of accounts, not just personal or anecdotal, but actual studies and statistics show, Devil May Cry 5 was a lot of people's first Devil May Cry game. And that makes sense. Of course it does. By the way, Devil May Cry 5 sold 6.1 million units, which, in addition to continuing to be good, puts it at the top slot. It is the best-selling Devil May Cry game. Because of course it is. It is a good game, regardless of how it specifically reviews. It is a good game, so that's important. It was marketed properly. They had the gap of time. The people wanted to make a good game. And, well, new audience. Meanwhile, Monster Hunter's over there like, and that's why Capcom might be going into its 3rd slump. But that's neither here nor there. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is, this is the first time I'm going to mention this. We actually have a gross warning for this game. It's not the worst ever, But it's something I wanted to mention for anybody who has a stomach or an issue or anything like that, because this game was done with the RE engine. Now, I don't know much about the very specific details of the RE engine. All I know is that everyone who's ever talked about working on it says it's one of the best engines to play with, from a developer perspective. And there's actually several games that have come out on the RE engine, which I have played, even reviewed, which I can agree, yeah, no, it's actually a pretty legit engine to play, too. So, shrug? I don't know if that's contributory, but it does mean there's a little bit more focus on more photorealism, especially from the main characters, and there's a little bit more focus on gross. So, thank you, Judo Joker. I do always appreciate those subs, and if you want to put that towards something in particular, please let me know. Now, you're probably thinking, wow, that's all awesome and amazing and incredible. And yeah, you're right. And I do anticipate this game will score pretty well. I don't know if it'll score better than 3. That's the mark, right? However, I do have to share something with you. I feel like this speaks for itself, but I actually bothered to get the full screen grab of all this nonsense because... yeah. This is, Now, the best part is, I bothered to grab this part down here at the bottom. So there's actually weapons you can get, which, honestly, I'm a little bit more okay with. But what really irritates me, there's this alternate styles, that's cool. Title calls, that's cool. But this thing at the bottom here, live-action cutscenes. I actually recommend... this is funny. You can buy that for $4, or you can go pull it up on YouTube for free. It's there. I checked this morning. And you can just go watch the cutscenes in this game in full live action. Which I highly recommend you do if you ever have the time, because they're hysterical. But anyways... nevertheless, purchasable cheats, end statement. I suppose if you're reading this out loud, I thought this was voice acted. As the years slipped by, the memory of Mundus failed. After 2,000 years, the seal in the underworld began to weaken. The demon emperor Mundus sent his minions after Sparta's wife and twin sons in an act of revenge. Sparta's human wife Eva stood no chance against the demons and lost her life. One of Sparta's sons, Virgil, went missing. The only survivor was Dante, Virgil's twin brother. Decades later, Dante was reunited with his lost brother, Virgil. Virgil survived the years with the help of his father's sword, the demon blade Yamato, and longed to obtain even greater power by unlocking the power of Sparta. Arkham, a man bent on obtaining demonic power and probably the most evil person in the setting, knew unlocking Sparta's power would weaken the seal on the underworld. To this end, Arkham manipulated Virgil from the shadows to fulfill his deluded ambitions. Conflicted over his feelings over his lost brother, Dante set out to stop Virgil and Arkham. Along the way, Dante met a demon hunter named Lady. Her lust for revenge against Arkham, the man who killed her mother, served to steal Dante's resolve. After learning Arkham was the real threat all along, Dante and Virgil teamed up to fight the Mad Scholar. However, this camaraderie did not last long, as the two could not overcome their differences. The battle between brothers was fierce, but Virgil met his match. In the end, he refused Dante's help as he fell alone into the underworld. Soon after, Dante opened his shop for business, Devil May Cry. Fronting as a local handyman, he used his business to hunt down demons and collect information on Mundus. Sometime later, a mysterious and beautiful woman appeared at Dante's door. The woman's name was Trish, and she bore a striking resemblance to Dante's deceased mother, which makes it weird that you called her beautiful, but that's neither here nor there. She then led Dante to Malay Island, where Mundus had been sealed away. There, Dante faced a gauntlet of Mundus's minions, all of whom fell to the Devil Hunter's inordinate strength. One such adversary was revealed to be Virgil, warped into the demon known only as Nilo Angelo. In the face of Mundus's cruelty, Dante's anger erupted like never before. The true power Dante inherited from his father Sparda was unleashed, which he used to seal Mundus away once again. Roll eyes. Dante then returned to hunting demons with Trish and Lady at his side. Anime. Many demons continued to invade the human world. But not even the demonic rulers rivaled the power Mundus could match Dante's strength. Hell was at peace in the human world. 8 seconds! But not for long! A Sparta-worshipping cult known as the Order of the Sword aimed to take control of the human world through demonic forces. Thus, Dante traveled to their base in Fortuna to assassinate the Order leader Sanctus. Incensed by this affront, the Order dispatched young Holy Knight Nero to kill Dante. Nero learned of the Order's true goals during his pursuit of Dante and was killed for it by the scientist Agnes. Unbeknownst to all, Virgil's sword Yamato had been in the Order's possession. The blade resonated with Nero, reviving him with new demonic powers. This was proof enough that the blood of Sparta coursed through Nero's veins as well. Having learned of the Order's sinister plans, Nero confronted fellow Holy Knight and mentor Credo about his involvement. But alas, the former mentor had been working towards the Order's goals all along. On top of everything, Sanctus was revived with the aid of nefarious powers. Nero's beloved Kyrie was then taken hostage. And the lovers were absorbed into the core of the Order's ultimate weapon, the Savior. Enraged over his sister Kyrie's treatment, Credo tried to save Nero, only to be dealt a fatal blow at the hands of Sanctus. This when all seemed lost, the legendary Dante arrived to battle the Savior and rescue Nero. Nero was then able to defeat Sanctus and put an end to the Order's evil machinations. Dante sensed in Nero the same connection to Sparta's power and so entrusted Yamato to the youth before leaving Fortuna. The two parted ways and continued their fight against demons in defense of the human world. Two descendants of Sparta kept the world safe and at peace for many years. But nothing lasts forever. And a crisis looms on the horizon, the likes of which the world has never seen! Something even bigger and more powerful than Mundus, and Argosax, and the random anime one, and the other 15. Yes, that's right, it's the real Demon King! Be terrified. So I'm going to go ahead and give an opinion right now, and I'm curious if the review will back it up. DMC 5 is effectively a remake of DMC 3. Now, I think of that for a lot of reasons. Obviously, the style of play, the approach, the structure, the character focus, the small number of characters, the tower. Basically, a lot of things on both the gameplay and the story side really feel like, hey, you remember DMC 3? Well, here's a more modern take on it. I mentioned this, actually, during the DMC review, if you were paying attention. Now, yeah, this is not the first time they've done this. And, well, we'll see what we think of it, like I said, as we go through it. But the main reason I mention that is that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's a relatively good thing for a franchise to... Let me say this as clearly as I can. It is not a bad thing for a franchise that's floundering to play it safe with its next iteration if, and this is critically important, if it's good. You have to actually do it well. You have to get your grounding again. You know, get stabilized. All right, hang on. Then you move forwards, right? And again, we'll see where this goes, if this goes with Devil May Cry 6. But you really do have to nail it. You have to land. You have to stick that landing. Because if you go back to basics and it's bad, then you've just not only made it worse, you've actually multiplied the worse based on the fact that, well, this is just the same thing again. And that's all anybody will ever say. Yes, I just like some grappling breakers.
Need to catch up to V. Fast.
So, let's get this out of the way. I like the RE engine for several reasons. But you know one of the reasons? I know this is actually more down to the actual designers, the people who do the painting and the brickwork and all this fun stuff, but have you seen how absolutely gorgeous some of these games look in the RE engine? Like, you remember when we played RE2R? That's a weird game to say out loud. RE2R on camera, right? Yeah, it looks good. It just straight up looks good. Like, it's not Unreal 5, but good God. And I mean, there's individual different shoes in the shoe shop. And you can see the mannequins, and where the one mannequin was knocked over, and there's a hat. And there's, like, a cloth, a bag, excuse me, that's what that is. It's a bag that's been knocked over. And, I mean, just look at the ground for a second. Really take that in. Like that, it is still it's still a texture. If you pay very careful attention, you can see where the texture lines are. But god damn, does that look good. Forgive me for gushing, but this looks legit. Now, I was about to say, similar to DMC4, the stage that looks the best is the first stage. After this, we're going to see tree and rot and ruins and tree and rot and ruins. Anyways, roots in the people. And when you walk into the people, that happens. Oh, I did tab out Valvedrix. I was going to say, how did my loadout change? And yeah, there's probably the most clear example. So now we've got a little bit of visual storytelling on top of everything else. So that sucks. By the way, I don't know if they'll ever do anything with this, but if you've been paying attention to the lore and the world building, the human world and the demon world used to be connected. They were connected by the Qliphoth tree. The tree, so demonic power comes from human blood. Like all of it. And the Qliphoth tree was a way in which to concentrate that power into one crystallized source, which then someone could take and become Mundus or become Urizen, right? Why is this all relevant? Why is the Qliphoth back? Now, I don't know if they've answered this somewhere, but there's actually a theory I've heard several times that because of Sparta's death about, 40 years ago at this point, the barrier between the two worlds has basically been breaking down ever since. That Sparta's seal between the two is getting weaker and weaker. And as of this game, it's officially just kind of gone away. Like, it is officially, the two worlds are re-merging again. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just something to chew on.
Should have just hacked my way through.
It's especially interesting since Yamato literally has the capacity to do things like, oh god, slice barriers between dimensions.
He doesn't seem like a demon to me.
He's not a demon. I was also going to say, from my own personal take on that, if you think about it, in DMC 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, there are multiple incursions between the demon world to the human world. That can't be helping that barrier, right? I mean, if nothing else, crack, 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 and now there's a bunch of lines going through the wall. That's my take on it. Now, having said that, I would say that as of 5, the barrier is probably not fully broken down.
Which way did I come from again?
Because of spoilers. But nevertheless, this is probably getting to be a problem that needs to be dealt with on a long-term basis, which would make a great basis for a Devil May Cry 6. So hear me out for a second, okay? What if Devil May Cry 6 stars Lady and Trish and Nero and Dante and Virgil? These three are playing through the human world levels. These two are playing through the demon world levels. And they're both progressing in their campaign side by side as they're trying to reestablish this barrier. I mean, everyone in chat says, you're terrible. I should talk about level design. So have you noticed that we walk into a room, there's the key, let's call it what it is, and then there's the door right next to the key. It's a little bit basic, but it's extremely informative because it's just boom, boom. And then the next time we encounter it, there's the door, which we see first, and then the key is exactly 2 rooms away. 1, 2. It's not the best. This isn't like Super Mario World levels of gameplay tutorialization, but we are seeing generally good escalation. And this is important since we're still in the intro. This is where this kind of stuff needs to be. Algorithms. Sorry. So you'll notice automatically, and we've talked about this whole time, this game is substantially more linear than the previous games. Almost every DMC up until now has been trying to be, let's call it what it is, a Resident Evil game. I actually appreciate the increased linearity of this, and instead of focus more on the encounter design, enemy design, and boss design, and making the combat as fun as possible, rather than trying to drift into level design, which they've almost never done properly, my opinion. Can I say one reason why I love DMC5 so much? Oh, we didn't get somebody. I was hoping for Valvedrix. And obviously it's...
Handle the closer one first. Gotta start somewhere.
Obviously it's my job to analyze the specifics and the whys and the wherefores. But regardless of absolutely everything else, DMC5 is one thing above all others. If you take everything else that makes up the game and throw it out the window, you know what DMC5 is? Fun. It's just fun to play. I know this is going to sound like a very strange comparison, but it reminds me of Mario Odyssey. A game that could be argued to be worse than previous Mario games, but stomps all of them in just sheer fun factor. Now, I'm not saying 5 stomps all the previous, I'm just saying it's just fun. I should probably show off what I literally just showed off a little bit better. So, yeah, so this is just mashing, right? I don't know if this is the first time they did this, but there's actually 3 separate timing combos here. One is... The second one is... And the third one is... If you've been paying attention, I've been doing all of those this whole time. It's just... It's so... It's very clean. It's very smooth. Okay, I gotta read that out loud. Mihawk says, I remember one reviewer saying they were disappointed by the lack of combat music and how quiet it was. I mean, I suck at this game, and I can at least get some frickin' tunes going. So a little side tidbit. I know you probably skipped right over it because the game doesn't spend that much time on it, but that's actually a bit of a callback to Mundus. So one of the gimmicks that Mundus had in lore was that he would make, I forget what it's actually, there's a term for it, but he would make an imperfect demon, right? It wouldn't be as powerful as it could be, but it would be a completely loyal slave. It would be completely bound to his will. The way he would make that, yeah, I like him. He's actually on the phone explaining. The way it worked is he would take someone and bind them within a demonic housing, essentially, and the person would serve as the core, the entity of the demon's form. We've actually already seen this back in DMC1 with Nilo Angelo. That's what he did with Virgil. And supposedly, he did this with others, but you get the general idea. Put me on... Kitty, put me on speaker! So, yeah, actually, yeah, exactly, Takoida. So that was how Mundus would use his enemies. Now, it's not stated outright here until later, I think, but the whole idea is Urizen is doing the exact same gimmick. Taking Lady and using her as a core for another demon, which creates a perfectly loyal slave, but is limited in overall power output. This is also a very recurring theme in a lot of fiction, including the aforementioned Warcraft. The more willing you are to be a convert or work for something, the more power you can draw from it. The general idea is usually that a portion of the power percentage of it is being used to subdue you, and therefore you can't go all the way up to 11, so to speak. Like, I have way too much muscle memory of the timing, you know?
Rest in peace. Pardon me.
V here. Get off the couch next time. V here is a perfect example of how an idea depends entirely on execution. It is so easy for me to picture V's gameplay in an earlier game. We could say PS2, but honestly, we could shove this back to the PS1 or even the SNES era. And if you screw up something like V, this would actually be aggravating. It would be a non-stop frustration playing as someone if they didn't design the everything. Just the everything. You know what I mean? Yeah, he would be a Sten. He would be a complete Sten. And it would just be, ugh. Because there's so much going on here. There is so much about how the enemies attack what, how you can aim them, how you can time their attacks, how they move, how they respawn, how they can be pulled back to you, even in the middle of combat, even if they're otherwise engaged because you do the right input or whatever. There's just so much going on that is keeping V actually worth a damn. And that's why I bang so hard on about the concept of execution. Ideas are just ideas until you implement them. Now, whatever. The distinction from a technical perspective is that dynamic music is when the songs change, or the tracks change, or whatever, based on what you're doing. Yoshi drums, Rax gets there quicker. Yoshi drums adds other layers to the song, other instrument tracks, essentially. Yoshi drums, like you're playing Mario World, you hop on Yoshi, there's a drum layer that wasn't there before. It's part of the song. It's technically playing all the time, it's just muted. That's Yoshi drums. And, the distinction between the two is, well, dynamic music is cool, and we see dynamic music in something like TIE Fighter, or in, there's another one, I can't think of the name of. It's an older game that does something like that. System Shock 2, or no, sorry, System Shock 1 did dynamic music, but that's different because Yoshi drums is the song you're currently listening to becomes more, depending on what you're doing. However, functionally speaking, both kind of fill the same slot. Because in both cases, what's happening is the music is changing based on what you're doing. Hang on, give me a moment, Yoshi. Yoshi. Wow! Valvatrix, you are now Yoshi, just so you know.
I need more strength. Come on. No escape. Thus endeth your requiem.
Had to show that off at least once. I mean, he really is kind of Agnes again. It's just we're playing him instead of him being, you know, Bujo. Agreed, Rex. Yeah, like I said, they're just gonna keep getting more, well, more of that, really.
Hey, wait. We could use that. Pick it up. Not that one. The other one.
This one?
Next to it.
Come on, Nico. This one?
Sure.
Okay, lol. This one? Second picture. This one? Yeah! Perfect jumping animation! Oh, wrong button. That guy owed me money.
I just remembered something. This town was attacked. Once before. Is that so? I was here. I can still see it. In fact, I was playing right here. That was the house.
So I want to talk about something, but the only way to do so is to massively spoil this game. Ready for this? It's gonna blow your mind.
Guess there's no point thinking about it.
That van is awesome. Okay, so, for real. Big spoiler moment. You ready for this? You ready for this? On the off chance you do care about spoilers, this is technically a spoiler. It's just one of the most obvious spoilers in gaming history. Other than the one in Arkham Knight, obviously. Oh my god, lady has clothing! That's not the spoiler. V is Virgil. To be slightly more accurate, V is Virgil's human half. We'll talk about some of the specifics, but here's the thing. I've actually thought about this game quite a bit since I played it, and of course over the past couple of days as we've been playing through the series. And I no longer agree with the sentence I just said. I don't think V is Virgil... I don't think V is Virgil's human half. I think V is Virgil. Having done a little bit of behind-the-scenes looking and a little research doing and all that fun kind of stuff, I've discovered a few little tidbits that are little nuances that may or may not be intended, you know? It may just be me reading too much into it. I'm not sure. But by all accounts, it looks like he ripped out... I'm trying to remember the exact quote. He ripped out his human self, his capacity for love, caring, and thought, I believe was the exact phrase. The reason that's relevant is because that makes Urizen feral. Oh, sure, he's capable of thought in the strictest sense of the word, in the same way that, say, maybe Goliath is. Or, you know, one of the other, let's call them what they are, lesser demons. Now, obviously, we can argue this back and forth. Again, I'm just giving a little bit of perspective. But yeah, exactly. The idea here is that my take on this, especially replaying this, is that V really is the real Virgil, for lack of a better way to put that. The true consciousness, personality, whatever else you want to, whatever term you want to put to that. He is a total dork who tries really hard to be too cool for school, who nevertheless does have a great deal of confidence and enthuses about his own little things, like his poetry and his stories, and, of course, does actually give a damn. And again, none of this is a negative. Actually, quite the contrary. This is probably not true, because every time I think of a theory for this series, it's proven wrong, and it makes the story worse. But no, I do think that V is our best insight into the type of person Virgil really is. Now, I'm going to use Warcraft as an example here because we've already talked Star Trek, we've already talked Star Wars, so we have to bring Warcraft into this. It's a rule. There's a character in Warcraft. His name is Malfurion Stormrage. Some of you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. The others, don't worry about it. What you need to know about Malfurion is he's generally a cool guy. He's generally long-term thinking, and he generally helps out, and he generally is what you'd call one of the people who is in the has-brains territory. However, there's one gigantic problem with that, one flaw, one chink in his armor, and that is his brother. Malfurion has a globally huge blind spot when it comes to his brother, and that has caused issues over literal years, if not millennia, of storytelling within the confines of the franchise. It's so obvious, too. Now, we know this was deliberate back in Warcraft 3, at the very least, but I'm getting off topic. The point is, Malfurion is a perfectly cool guy until his brother gets involved, and you see why I'm bringing it up with regards to this game. Virgil's blind spot, Virgil's blind spot being Dante makes way too much sense, especially given some of the additional layers his character gets in this game. If you were paying attention earlier, I actually mentioned that little tidbit in that story that I was reading out loud about how he got a book, wrote his name on it because this now makes it mine because I have a rivalry with my brother. And you can just feel that kind of issue there. Something that they've never really gotten over. We already saw this in 3. Hell, we saw this in 1 as well, although in a very, very unusual way. Now, the key part here is that this also goes the other way around. Dante also has a huge blind spot when it comes to Virgil. Probably at least in part because of the events of 3. Now, that'll be more relevant later, but I bring all of this up because if you look at this game through the lens of V is the real Virgil, a lot of incidents, a lot of how he acts, and a lot of what he does makes a lot more sense. For example, why he would personally reach out to Lady and say that he's glad that she's okay. After all, it was him who was the one who enslaved and imprisoned her in the Nello Angelo armor thing that I already talked about. Something that was done to Virgil himself. I forget what it's called. I think there is actually a term for it, but you know what I mean, right? It's the encasement protocol I talked about earlier. And yeah, Virgil understands exactly what it's like to be turned into a living core and enslaved like that. So, either way, cooking with Nico. Hi. Today we're going to take... I can't do Southern. Today we're going to take this can of beans here. I'm going to turn it into my personal favorite. No, it's not what you're thinking. Get your head out of the gutter. Instead, we're going to do something nice and simple. And she makes like this really, really good bowl of beans. And she's just eating it like... And she holds up the spoon, right? Check it out. And then a demon comes up and she just throws the spoon at the demon. And it, like, you know the whistle-controlled dart in Guardians of the Galaxy? It's like that. And so the spoon just kind of starts going psh, 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 and darting in and out of the demon, and the demon's just, like, trying to figure out where the heck the spoon is. And then she whistles, and it comes back. Tries to take a bite. Oh, I got some demon blood on it. Hang on. There we go. Secret ingredients, whiskey. And then she throws it again, and it goes right through the demon and kills it.
It's about time I landed something.
All that for a drop of blood.
Weak mortal. Demon power does not course through your veins, yet you try. How dare you strike me?
And of course, Virgil would be really, really pissed about anything challenging his power. Which once again goes back to that bestial, basic, not fully sentient aspect of the brain thing.
Will regret being born useless and human. I will show you your worst nightmares.
And yeah, it's actually pretty obvious if you're paying attention that that's Virgil's actor.
Despair and death. Scatter like dust.
Okay, hi, Pygmy Frank. What? I mean, again, what I have to say is predominantly a theory and not fact, but I do firmly think that this is not Virgil in any way that really matters. I mean, oh, remind me to talk about the personality thing in a minute.
Human, petulant mortal flesh. Cursed the moment you were brought into this world.
Sounds a lot like he's talking about himself, doesn't it? There's a real-life concept called monomania. It's when you get fixated to something to the point of being unhealthy. I don't mean being into Star Trek. Monomania is much, much worse than what I'm talking, than whatever meme answer you're thinking about in your head right now. It's pretty messed up. My take on this is that Urizen here is monomaniacal. That he is so focused on power and absolutely nothing else. Yeah, Genesis and Loveless is actually not a bad example of this. That it informs the entirety of his personality, if you could even call it that. Hence, the idea that anyone would challenge his power successfully, even minutely, is what pisses him off enough to detach himself from the tree, which he's been feeding off of for like a month at this point, and actually get up to really try and take it seriously, because something has just tried to get in the way of the only thing it cares about. Now, if you're paying attention, this is a development, that's the wrong word. This is an escalation of what Virgil himself was going through. Oh god, this horrible thing happened to me. I need power so that it'll never happen again. Virgil was never thinking past step 2. It was always just back there in step 1, right? He needed power. Once I have power, it's going to be fine. There was no stage 3. There was nothing else. Get power, win. Now, take away the sentience, the sapience, the intelligence, the capacity for a being on top of that, and all you're left with is power, the end. It's worth noting that if you... Oh, I thought I wrote it down. Hang on one second. It does. It makes sense, Bokimi. Like, Virgil doesn't move much as a character. Until now, obviously. Give me a second. So, if you win against the fight we just did as Virgil, the quote you get is, "Usurper slain, an empty throne, the crown lies covered in blood. Power is its own reward, and we have just begun. Grab your blade, the time has come, we only have each other." And honestly, that says all it really needs to. I mean, V is extraordinarily well designed. He may be simple, but the complexity in his design is bonkers good. But we talked about that earlier. So anyways, new enemy type. As you can see, it's Jaheira. Yeah, as I am very fond of saying, simple does not mean bad. But no, see... How do I explain this? Let me use something I know reasonably well. You, do you know what... Oh god, what's it called? Alternative voting, I think is what it's called? Or preferential ranked choice something something voting? Of course, I can't... I said I'd talk about something I know, I can't even think of the name of the damn thing. Ranked choice. You know what ranked choice voting is? Because ranked choice voting for you, the voter, is very simple. But ranked choice voting for the person doing the actual, you know, management, running of the vote is very complex. Which is sort of my overall point. It's a complex under the hood. You know what, let me use a much simpler question. You know how to drive a car? Now, okay, driving a car is not simple. But making a car actually function, all the electronics, engineering, moving parts, the controlled regularity of explosions that are keeping the car functioning, that's extraordinarily complex. And that's V, in a nutshell, right there. Just about anybody could drive a car. Not a lot of people can tell you what's going on under that hood. I guess what my overall point is and this is something I myself am still beginning to become more and more aware of. A tremendous amount of design goes into making something that is simple to control. To keep this within the realm of video games, you ever play Metroid Dread? Do you have any idea how much crap is going on constantly, every frame, in order to keep Metroid Dread controlling as smooth and fluidly as it is? It's actually very, very hard to make something that someone can pick up and control and have it control right, you know? We do. That's also true, Rex. One of the reasons I tend to be so harsh about so many aspects of game design, and yet at the same time give so many positives when they get it right, is because I know how little I know about how much work goes into making truly good game design. Truly good encounter design. Truly good enemy design. Truly good combat. Truly good controls. Truly good map. Truly good encounters. I already said encounters, but it bears repeating. Itemization. Power progression curve. Every single one of those individual items that's on the audit sheet is there because it's so easy to screw up. All of it. Yeah, there's so much. One of the reasons I tend to have so much respect for the giants like Spielberg, I'm just going to name drop him there, is because he is just so good at all those little things in ways you probably have never noticed, and that's kind of the point. The fact that you've never noticed all the thought he put into all that stuff means he's doing his job very well. And it's the same thing with game design, like Yura was just talking about. If a game plays right, then it plays right. And there you go. You're not really supposed to notice. You're supposed to play the game and be like, oh, this plays great. End statement. Now, I'm a geek, so I tend to get into this sort of thing. And of course, I'm a reviewer, so it's my job to notice this sort of thing. But it's still very understandable why you're just looking at a game and just saying, man, this plays great. Because even if you can't understand the specifics of why, you notice it's there. Anyways, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Your pleasure.
There was a really long-standing mentality in Hollywood, specifically, I don't know about other countries, for a very long time, that editing was the kind of... How do I explain this? That editing is... Okay, here's how I'm going to describe this. I'm going to use the food analogy, because I always use analogies. It's analogies all the way down. So, think about it this way. Think about you're making a sandwich, right? Nowadays, editing is like choosing the right bread. You think it's not important.
Get it together, buddy!
You think it's not important, but it actually affects everything. The whole sandwich is changed by this bread, right? And making it right and using it right and correct selection, correct cooking, all that fun stuff. All that determines it. The bread will completely change that sandwich, right? But that's editing now. Back in the day, editing was considered the same thing as that little garnish you put on the side of the sandwich. So it's not even part of the sandwich. It's just this little extra thing. It doesn't matter, really. There were movies made, mainstream Hollywood movies made, which didn't even have editing. If you ever wonder why there's so many films that you've ever heard of, oh, they just threw such and such in, or such and such wasn't actually in the script, it was just tossed in. It's because what was very common for decades was they would film, and then they would very precisely chop, and then the only editing that would happen is the shot would get trimmed to where it should be for any extra they got over all of that, and that was it. That was the shot. Nobody thought about going through, doing multiple camera angles, or slicing this over this thing, or pulling out this pause here, or stretching out this part here. None of that happened. The editing side was just make the film that we shot viewable, and that was it. Now, I'm not saying A New Hope started the trend of editing being a big deal and a major part of filmmaking, but it was sure as hell the codifier. So I have several things I wanted to talk about. First of all, the voice actress of Trish is actually the voice director of this game. I just thought I'd share that little anecdote, speaking as a voice director myself. It's always kind of interesting to see who's trying to tell the actors what's what. And maybe, just as a random thought, maybe Square Enix could hire her and teach their voice actors how to do their goddamn lines. Second point. Virgil, I want to just kind of run you through things really quick here. Virgil was a kid who had a rivalry with his brother. Then, the town he lived in, over 100 people, and his mother, and seemingly his brother, were all murdered in the course of a single night by demons. Now, say what you like about that in whatever direction you want to, that is traumatizing. And credit to the game's course, it doesn't portray that as just like a whatever thing. But it does actually make a very clear point. This game in particular makes a very clear point that that night had a huge impact on both Dante and Virgil. And both of them are still dealing with it 40 years later. So Virgil goes off, kind of tries to do his own thing, discovers some power, barely survives. There's a couple of things he goes through I'm going to skip over. Has a couple of encounters with his brother. They don't go very well, especially because Virgil specifically thinks that thinks that Eva favored Dante over him, so that didn't help the relationship any. But the point is, you know what it takes for two people to get over mutual trauma? Two things. Time, and actually sitting down and working through it with each other. Instead, what they would do is they would fight. And they would stab and kill, but it doesn't do anything. We talked about this back in DMC3. They're fine. Their superhuman nature allows them to just beat the snot out of each other and just kind of walk away from it. So they didn't actually talk about it. They didn't actually interact, and they didn't actually process. Now, human or demon, there's something about the nature of how personality works. Stuff that doesn't get processed just kind of stays there in the back, right? And that can cause all kinds of problems. It depends on you, the individual. But maybe it'll fester, maybe it'll grow, maybe it'll be a block, preventing certain other aspects of your personality from developing or pursuing. But one way or another, having that block, like I want you to mentally imagine just a chunk of crystal jabbed into the back of your skull. And it's just getting in the way of everything. Until that's worked through, until you've chiseled through that, and actually processed it, and allow it to flow back through the system, it's just going to sit there making everything worse. I am saying this as someone who is still working through my own PTSD, which is something that has crippled me for a decent chunk of my life. Not just my own studies and analysis on the matter. So, neither Virgil nor Dante have ever really had that. Dante has had a better time of it, because Dante has had Lady and Trish, and his interactions with Nero, and he's gone around doing his thing. But if you pay attention, this game in particular, 5 in particular, makes it very clear Dante has still not gotten through all that blockage in the back there. He's still lounging around in his room, which doesn't have the power on, doesn't have the water flowing, and just not caring. Or, to be slightly more accurate, he just doesn't have the energy anymore. We've talked before about how Dante is someone who is depressed, but masks that. As we see as he's getting older, it's getting harder for him to maintain that mask. And so yeah, it's classical depression. It's straight up depression. Just sitting there, not having the motivation, not having the energy, not having the interest. Just, nope. Virgil, we'll get into that in a minute. But the point is, Virgil didn't even have that much. Virgil had even less than that. So what Virgil does is he grips the one thing he knows, the one thing he has. What does Virgil have? Power. We've already talked about this a bit with Urizen, but this is still true with Virgil, the actual, sentient sapient person. So he fixates on it. This is what I want because this is what I have because this is what I know. It is actually a very childlike fixation in its own way. Fixates on it, fixates on it, fixates on it, loses everything, loses in a fight to Dante, falls into the demon world, throws off his scabbard, symbolic relevance there, goes to fight Mundus, gets pasted by Mundus. Mundus enslaves him in one of those wonderful little things we've talked about a few times. So none of this is great for his mental health. Then we scooch forward a little bit. He is tossed at his brother, ends up losing to his brother, and essentially dies. In fact, based on what I know of the lore, I think what was supposed to happen is that he actually did die, because demons self-resurrect in this setting for some goddamn stupid reason or another. And so he either dies or gets on the verge of death. Doesn't really matter which. Either way, he's just like, ugh, barely recovering. So what's the first thing he does once he's capable of actually moving around? He goes after his sword, which happens to be with Nero. Takes the sword back, incidentally taking the arm back, which contains Yamato. That's why he took the arm. And then goes off to use Yamato to slice himself, ripping all of, again, his thought, his personality, his human weakness, his love out of him, so he can just have the power. Now, I'm going to pause there, because the rest of the story speaks for itself, but the reason I'm highlighting this whole timeline over here is because I want you to see this and see that this is a pretty sucky life. This dude's in his 40s, and he's effectively lived maybe a couple of years out of all of that. Maybe. A lot of that has actually been spent literally in stasis. Some of it has been spent mind-controlled. The rest of it has been spent running away from a trauma he has never dealt with. Exactly. This guy is, for all intents and purposes, still a young adult. I mean, this is the DMC lore run. I've been doing my research like I would for a normal lore run. It's just we've decided to start labeling things review streams pretty much universally. Anyways. So now we're playing as Dante. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, so let's start with a couple of things. First of all, this is super cool. You have loadouts. Now, you can, just have all the weapons here. That's cool. That's important to the loud. But you know what? Not everyone wants to have access to every weapon at the same time. Maybe they want to have access to only just Cerberus. So let's, try to remember how to do this, actually. Oh, it's not going to let me, is it? I know there's a way to do this. There we go. So maybe you just want Rebellion. Or maybe you just want Balrog and Rebellion. I don't think you can get rid of Rebellion. But the fact that you can decide to say, I just want to focus on Balrog because I like using Balrog, that's cool. It continues the loadout concept of Nero. I think it's locked in for this exact mission. I think that's why I can't get rid of it at the moment. Yeah. Yeah, Dante has a crazy amount of kit. Like, honestly, and I'm going to be just completely honest here, I think that Dante has a little bit too much kit. Oh, by the way, you can do the same thing with the guns. Well, I sort of swore after 4 that I would try out Gunslinger first, and I am a man of my word. Yeah, by the way, we now have a closer with the shotgun. I mean, come on. Is this as good as Lady in DMC4? No. Is this substantially better than Gunslinger has ever been? My opinion? Yes. You know, ironically, Yura, I think if WoW had exactly this combat, it would not scare away the so-called casuals. You know why? This is going to sound elitist, but I absolutely do not mean it as such. This game is actually quite new player friendly. Something I just talked about was how incredible the complexity was behind the design of V, for example. But something that needs to be kept in mind is that there's a tremendous amount of design to making something that has a nice low floor and a nice high ceiling. This is harder to do than it sounds. Making something so that there's a low barrier to entry, so that just about anybody can pick it up and have fun with it, but that the ceiling cap is way up here. And let's be clear, Devil May Cry 5 ceiling cap is pretty high. I've seen people play this at level. It's bonkers. Yeah, I haven't even shown off auto mode. So, my point is, again, if you somehow magically made WoW play this well, I'm pretty sure that would go over quite well. WoW is already very action-oriented and is literally designed off of FPS formatting, for reasons I'm not going to bore you all with here. So, don't mistake me, there is, of course, a degree of difference in mentality. Some players want to just push themselves to be more awesome because it's fun. Some people don't. And that's a fine distinction to make. But I don't think one is better than the other, or one is higher than the other, or any other than nonsense elitism. Bullcrap that tends to circle around that drain, personally. It's just two different people who have two different perspectives on enjoying the same game. Now, obviously not every game should appeal to both markets, blah, 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 blah. But the point is, we're all just gamers, right? We're just here to have fun. You know what I mean? World sucks enough as is. We don't need to add to it. No, we don't. We don't need to add to it. It's okay. Now, I'm going to go and admit something, which is going to cost me my gamer card here. When I first played this game, it had been a long time since I'd played any Devil May Cry game. In fact, I'm pretty sure the last time I'd played a Devil May Cry game prior to playing prior to playing 5 for the stream was when 4 came out, when I played through 4. So it's about a decade. The reason I bring all that up is when I first unlocked Dante, my first reaction was, oh god! There's too much! There's too much to keep track of. Now, I'm saying this partially to make fun of myself. But also because there's honestly no shame in having that reaction to it. A lot of people think that choice paralysis is some big shameful thing, and it kinda isn't. It's just you locking up a little bit, and what, you know, we as people need to do is just be like, alright, hang on. Take a moment. No. Take a breather and just be like, alright, what do we got? Pick something. Stick with it for a bit. Focus on it a little. See what you feel about it. Go one direction. Maybe try the other direction, too. He owed me money.
O king of stench and filth. I'm impressed. Those are 2 of the most badass women in the world. And I only know one other guy who can defeat them.
Jackpot. Dante.
Yeah, so, as you can kind of tell, Dante himself is not super happy about any of this. Notice he starts off joking, but can't even finish his own jest without losing his temper on the matter. Like I said, Dante and Virgil both have a massive blind spot for each other. Oh, bull crap. I was guarding. You saw that! I was just hanging in there. The game robbed me. Twice in a row, I tried to type Nero, and I typed Virgil. Like, I was like, V-E-R... Nope, nope, nope. V-E... Nope. N-E-R-O. So, we played as Larxene. We played as Xigbar. Now we're playing as Xaldin. Think about it.
How do you have so much power left?
Good answer to that question. I have no real evidence of this, but I've theorized for a while that V was disintegrating physically while Urizen was disintegrating mentally. because neither of them have each other, split person, yada yada yada. This would also help to explain why Urizen is so powerful. A very common trend in a fairly large amount of fiction is that the less restrained you are, the stronger you are. Or, to be more accurate, the stronger you can be. This is actually based on a real-life principle. As I've said many, many times, the human body is actually very, very strong and can do a lot, but it shouldn't because it'll damage itself in the process, right? That whole thing. So the idea in fiction is that lends itself more towards the metaphysical as well, magic or demonic power or whatever. So the idea here being that, yeah, Urizen is kind of stuck in one-winged angel mode, and it's kind of destroying whatever mind he has, but that he doesn't care. It doesn't care. And that's why Urizen is at a level of power that's so ridiculous. Now, I still think that's stupid, and I still think it deserves the negative I gave it. But that's my personal take on that.
Come here and face me like a man!
You got it!
Reminiscence! Time long past.
Time to bleed!
So, you can do this.
Lady never did this. Time to finish this, Virgil. Once and for all.
For some reason.
I won't lose to the likes of you, little brother. Try and keep up.
It's just about time to settle this.
That's right. Come on.
Agreed, okay.
Cut off your own son's arm for this?
Cut my son. Nothing. Slay all.
Kyrie. When I was a kid, I was alone. You and Kratos were all I knew. And now all of a sudden I find out I have a family. What am I supposed to do with that?
You always know which path is right and which is wrong. There's no need to doubt yourself.
Thanks. I guess that's all I needed to hear. I have one last thing to take care of. Then I'm coming home.
I do like that moment. Nero is, as he always has been,
I couldn't protect Kratos.
a good boy.
To this day, I hate myself for not having enough strength. But this time is different. I swear! I'm not letting you die!
I mean, in a setting like this, the power of love is an actual, like, measurable thing. So I'm with it.
This is curious.
Nero.
You. It is not L1. Okay. That's the question.
Too slow.
Story. Net story. Actually, let me do something strange. Let's do this really quick. Just so I can compare these side by side. Net story. Let's go through the whole franchise real quick, shall we? So Devil May Cry 1 had a -3 to story. 2 had a -26 to story because it's 2. 3 had +28 because it's awesome. It's the best story in the franchise. 4 had +12. 5 has +15, which actually kind of puts it in the middle of the pack. But, oh, no, it doesn't. I'm sorry. I'm saying that wrong. It actually puts it in the number 2 slot behind 3. Although, ironically, that still means 5 still has only barely over half of the quality of story of 3, which I stand behind. Then we have gameplay. So, Devil May Cry 1 had a net -5 to gameplay. Let's skip over 2 for a second. 4 had a net +7, which a lot of bugs and issues kind of drag that down. And the padding. Oh, the padding. 3, of course, had a net +28, which should probably sound familiar. Now, the reason I skipped over 2 was a net -63 on gameplay, which I believe was a record. In fact, I could double check. No, it's not a record. Sorry, I'm wrong. There's actually a couple of games that actually have worse gameplay than that. Yeah, literally 2. Quest 64 and Secret of the Stars. Even that's just barely. So yeah, net -63. Oh yeah. I recommend you watch the Devil May Cry 2 run or the highlights. I'm not even counting Tor or FF14 because different metrics. Point being, that's not great. Devil May Cry 5 net plus 63 to gameplay. That puts Devil May Cry 5's story per hour density at 1.25, which is pretty damn good, and gameplay positive per hour of 5.23, which is bonkers. Now, that's not the best gameplay density we've ever had, but that is among the best. That is extraordinarily good. That actually has more pluses per hour in gameplay than Metroid Dread does, for a bit of perspective. So, I'm going to go back down here to readdress. Ratios. So let's run through this. The story ratio of DMC 1 was 36.36%. Not great. Story ratio of Devil May Cry 2 was 0. Which is fantastic. Story ratio of Devil May Cry 3, 91.18%. Fantastic. Devil May Cry 4, story ratio 68%. And Devil May Cry 5 has 77.78%. Once again, putting it in the number 2 slot. On the gameplay axis, we have 1, which had a ratio of 42.42%. Not good. Devil May Cry 2, which had 2.99%. I'm sorry. I just played Devil May Cry 2, and I'm still just bonkered by that. 3 had 75%, which is good. 4 had 55%, which is okay. 5 had 92% gameplay ratio, which is incredibly good. All of this gives us our golden numbers. Can I get a drum roll, please? While you're winding that up, let me give you some numbers. Devil May Cry 1's golden number, negative 4.59. Devil May Cry 2's golden number, negative 60.12. Devil May Cry 4's golden number, 52.25, which leaves just 3 and 5. 3 got a 190.09. That's the target. Devil May Cry 5 got 209.31. Didn't get over it by too much, and the story score of Devil May Cry 3 certainly drags it up quite a bit. But that gameplay score stomps. DMC 5 dragged itself over the 200 mark. Pretty rare that we get a game that high. That is quite impressive. Final thoughts. Bang, bang, pull my devil trigger. This was really, really, really fun. Going through the whole franchise, that's why I kind of wanted to do all the numbers side by side. That was just fantastic to play through. Obviously, very frustrating several times. It is fascinating because, if I'm being completely honest with you, only one of those scores surprises me, and that's 4s. Because the rest all kind of line up with exactly what I was expecting walking into it. I told you right at the beginning, I didn't think 1 would score that well. I knew 2 would score badly. I knew 3 would score well, and I wasn't sure about 4. And I told you, some of you actually remember this, I said 5 is going to break 200. It's going to have that potential. It only barely got there, admittedly. But holy crap, this game is very, very, very fun to play. And I highly encourage anybody who has even a passing interest in this game or this franchise to pick up 5 and give it a whirl. It's the only one I could recommend without any asterisks attached. Just go play 5. It's an awesome, awesome game. I have to go and do a lot of paperwork and get the highlight reel done and all that. There will be, as of this moment, a stream later tonight. That'll be the D&D stream. Tomorrow we'll be streaming, well, some of you have already noticed what it is. It's just a little bit of a side thing, and I'll explain it more tomorrow. But otherwise, I do hope to see you there.